barn too. And I say for better or for worse because I think you'll find after the presentation today by Sean Garvey with Berkshire Barn that it is an amazing barn. And for worse because it is a barn at great risk. And quite frankly, we're concerned it might not survive the winter. The first thing being the L in the back here. And what that might mean should that come down. And if you've just been standing out front here, you might say, well, it doesn't look that bad. Where do we take you around back? And you'll see. But we wanted Sean to be here today so he could talk about the barn. It is an interesting structure, and tell us a little bit about the challenges maybe we face in making sure it's here next spring. And so, Sean, thank you for coming out this morning.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
What age is Sean? There you go.
We'll start with what I know. I came here, I was asked to come up and take a look at the barn several weeks ago, and it was my first time visiting the barn. And was told that the barn was it moved here, I think, in 1903 or so. And barns are often moved. I spend my life moving barns, and we often find that the barns we move had already been moved once, even twice before, and go through incredible transformations, from the time they were built maybe 250 years ago until today. And sometimes I'm just the next guy in line who's moving the barn again and making some other kind of change or restoration to it. This barn, after walking inside, I was able to identify immediately that it's an early 1800s barn, probably from the first quarter of the 1800s. And I don't know that we know where it was moved from. Probably not very far away back then. They
Savoy,
were
supposedly.
Trailers.
Yeah, we heard it was
today.
Savoy.
The rumor is Savoy.
Yeah, probably. And yeah, that's pretty far. Yeah, that would have been a workout.
What was that key when you walked in and could determine?
Well, when we go inside, I'll show you all the features that identify the barn. What this barn is this is a semi-traditional English barn, what we call a threshing barn. It's a 4-bent, 3-bay barn, and these are all terms that most of you probably aren't aware of, but when we go inside, I'll explain all that to you. It's pretty interesting stuff to know what you're looking at when you walk in a barn, and for those of you who have a barn at home, after we're done, you'll be able to go home and go in your own barn and identify all the different timbers and know what you're looking at. And it's pretty fun. But there's definite features in here that show this is, in fact, an English frame, and I say English meaning it's of a style that was brought over from settlers who came over from England. Back from the first settlers that came over, they brought over their trade with them. They brought over their way of building and started building the same way over here. But they very quickly started making some modifications to what they used to do in England because they got over here and saw these massive towering trees for miles and miles and miles, stuff they weren't accustomed to having in England. So they started building their barns a little bigger. They started using longer and bigger timbers, and there's some evidence of those transformations in this barn even only 30, 40, 50 years after they first started coming over here and building. So I'll point that stuff out when we go inside. In addition to what the barn actually is, what we're really here to talk about is the condition of the barn. And the main barn is in really good condition. It's an exceptional condition, and it's certainly worthy of saving. It's because of its age, it's very early, it's in a really nice shape. It's one of those barns that you can't just let die away. There aren't a whole lot of these left around. The addition is another story. In itself, it's a nice structure from the ground up, but from the ground down, it's in really bad shape, and it's one of those situations where you have a very nice barn on a really bad foundation, and if the barn tips over, then you don't have anything left. And in addition to it wrecking itself if it falls over, it's also going to do some damage to the main barn because they're connected. So those are some of the things we're going to walk around and tour and show you, and hopefully generate some appreciation for the barn because it is a very nice structure, and you're very fortunate to have had it gifted to you. I talk to people every day who wish and dream about being able to have a barn like this to play in, me being one of them. I work in everybody else's. But I would love to, in my own backyard, have a 18th century or very early 19th century barn because they're just they're a dying feature of our landscape. There's a pretty well-known barn that's now gone that most of you probably know of because of where you are over in Buckland on Route 2, or on Route 112.
Yep.
The one with the big cupola that's still there.
Yeah.
Well, if you do a search online for old barns, cupolas, pictures of that barn actually come up when it was still standing. There were people that would drive by and take photos of it and put it on websites. And unfortunately, of course, it fell, but that beautiful ornate cupola is still sitting there on top of the rubble. And that happens every day. I see barns in that kind of condition all the time. Because unfortunately, a lot of people don't have the money to keep the barn up. A lot of people don't have a good reason to keep the barn up, especially farmers, because today's farmers don't have a lot of use for a 30 by 40 barn that's 200 years old. It doesn't have a floor system to handle the tractors. It doesn't have enough headroom to handle the heavy equipment. It doesn't have enough storage space for the hay. They were built in a day when farms were small. Farms were meant to sustain the family. And then when farming got bigger barns were built, and the farmer says, well, this barn isn't any good to me. I'm not going to put money into it. I'm just going to tear it down and build a new one. And that's life. But the end result is 200 years later, now all of these great features of our history are gone. And so my job is to protect these things, like your job is to protect the land. So with that, if there's any, we can talk out here and I can answer questions before we go in. We're a lot of people to all go in there all at once. There's not a lot of standing room in there. I brought a whole bunch of photos here that you're welcome to look at. I brought a whole bunch of my tools here that you're welcome to look at. Be careful with the sharp edges, but you're welcome to check them out. These are tools of the trade. These are the same tools that the guy who built this barn in the early 1800s used. These tools are every bit as old as this barn. I don't use new tools. I use some new tools, but I love my old chisels and old hand saws, and we work with these kind of tools, and the type of work we do is consistent with the age of the structure we're working on. We hand hew our own timbers, we shave our own pegs, we take great pride in what we do, and we take, we have a lot of respect for the people that worked on these in the beginning, and we try to uphold, what they did and hopefully do work that they would be proud of.
Sean, do you think it would make sense to maybe do a quick walk around the outside so they get a sense of what we're talking about, and then we can talk about
That's a good idea.
features? You want to just kind of